Hi, I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the executive director of the Walrus. I'm also your host and moderator. We are thrilled to be joining you online, bringing people together across the country and beyond, live in conversation with the Walrus Talks at Home, DEI, presented by Canadian Race Relations Foundation. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on in Toronto, Ontario, to Toronto. A land acknowledgement helps us recognize history, thinking about how it informs where we are now and what changes can be made going forward in a commitment to reconciliation. Our offices and where I am in downtown Toronto are located within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Here at the Walrus, we're honored to contribute to a long tradition of storytelling, and we welcome you all, wherever you are, to reflect on the land. As part of the ongoing work of reconciliation, if you haven't done so already or even recently, we encourage you to read the 94 calls to action recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Bit about the Walrus. The Walrus is Canada's conversation. We cover stories across Canada to offer a deeper understanding of who we are for those inside and outside the country. This year, from tariffs to taunts of becoming the 51st state, Canada is the conversation, and the country is standing strong. We are responding to this moment with facts, analysis, and even some humor. You can find us online at The Walrus at thewalrus.ca and print on newsstands or by subscribing to The Walrus. This is Donald Trump peeping through here in our June issue. You can also listen to us by audio on podcasts. All of our stories are available via audio online or take part in events like this one. This work is independent and it's powered by our community of donors, supporters, and partners. So thank you to Canadian Race Relations Foundation for supporting this work. Tonight, we are exploring a subject that's at the heart of many cultural and political conversations: diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and asking a rather uncomfortable question: is DEI dying? Recently, DEI has faced significant challenges and rollbacks, particularly across the border in the United States. We've seen executive orders dismantling inclusion programs and corporate strategies shifting or scaling back in response to backlash. But what does EDI, as it's often called in Canada, with equity first, mean for us here? Are we seeing the same retrenchment? Is there an opportunity to recommit and reimagine what inclusion can look like? This evening, our talkers will explore the tensions and transformations of DEI today and how we can continue the work of building ultimately a more equitable society, not just in principle, but in practice. With the Walrus Talks at Home, each speaker will give their talk one after the other, all live, and this is followed by a moderated Q&A session with our talkers and all of you, our audience at home. So feel free to submit your questions at any point, pop them into the comments section, and when you share your question, let us know where you're joining us from. We also encourage you to share any highlights from this conversation on social media. Some people even take a picture as they're watching it and share that. Please tag us at the Walrus, and the hashtag for tonight is hashtag Walrus Talks. Coming up, you'll be hearing from live Dr. Komal Bhasin, founder of Insayva Inc. Rich Donovan, chairman and chief executive officer, the Return on Disability Group. Bhasin Mattar, journalist, as well as a contributing writer for The Walrus. And Dr. Yabome Gilpin-Jackson, Vice President, People, Equity, and Inclusion, Simon Fraser University. Thank you all for joining us. I'm looking forward to getting into it. And we're going to begin tonight with Komal Bhasin. Komal, over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much for having me. Good evening, everyone. So, look, I want to believe that Canada isn't following the path of the US when it comes to DEI. It's what many of us like to think, that we're more inclusive, we're less polarized, we're more polite. But I can tell you as a consultant that just last month, I experienced the most outright resistance I've ever encountered in a decade of doing this work during a DEI or EDI session on governance with a board of directors just outside of Toronto. And it wasn't subtle. It was bold, it was harsh, it was unapologetically unfiltered in rejecting the need for DEI efforts in Canada. And importantly, during that exchange, there was reference to the course correction on DEI coming from the US as a positive trend. That was a challenging moment for me, but interestingly, I wasn't surprised. And what I would say is that I'm of two minds right now. On one hand, I'm deeply concerned. I'm concerned about the erosion of DEI infrastructure that we've built. I'm concerned about the ideological influence, that retrenchment creeping north, the conflation of DEI with political agendas, and the effects on our relationships at work, on our relationships and on the personal front and in our communities. I'm concerned about the silencing effect of being afraid of speaking up about our beliefs and our differences, and even about DEI itself, and the effects that that will have on dialogue and on honest disagreement. But on the other hand, I prefer to see things as they are. I'm a pragmatist. And this moment in time reveals what has always been true about EDI or DEI in Canada. We were never as far ahead as we like to believe that we are. And in many cases, our impact has been overstated, our efforts have been performative, and our approaches have been siloed, except for really specific pockets where equity work has been long embedded and really serious and really groundbreaking. The attacks on DEI being out there in the open for the first time, we are getting to see how organizations and leaders and even communities have really felt about DEI all along. And personally, I see this as important. I'd like to see things as they are. And I also see this moment as an opportunity. So here's what I'm paying attention to right now. What I see is more resistance, but I also see more complexity in terms of the kind of DEI advice and guidance my clients need. And that's where the complexity creates a bit of an opening. So frankly, the complexity is keeping me pretty busy at work. So when people ask this question of if DEI is dead in Canada or DEI is dying in Canada, for me, my work is busy. As someone whose approach is grounded in organizational psychology, leadership development, and relational work, I'm a psychotherapist and an executive coach. I've always understood that DEI is not just an ideology or set of values, but it is a practice, a way of relating to one another. And so this is the thing that I know. No matter what we believe, no matter what side of the debate we're on, no matter whether we agree or disagree with DEI, no matter how we vote, what we believe about the absolute devastation happening around the world, um, no matter how we hold our position on those things, we still go back to work tomorrow. We still sit in meetings with each other. We still try to do good alongside the people who we think live and are with, even when they believe differently from us. We still are of and in the world. And so the question is, how do we do that well when the very DEI frameworks meant to support us in this task of being with each other are being pulled apart? Over the past year or so, I've shifted with this increasing complexity. I've shifted how I work slightly, and I've been focusing on supporting organizations to build what I'm calling relational safety. Relational safety is the capacity to navigate disagreement, identity-based tension, and emotional complexity without shutting down each other, without avoiding hard topics or minimizing ourselves. It's about holding tension, staying in dialogue, and building skills at rupture and repair. And I'm literally teaching people how to disagree, to hold their position, and to remain in relationship. And this is the complexity that DEI is facing going forward. And I believe that it's these skills and competencies that will sustain DEI into the future. And so, where do we go from here, assuming that many of you tuning in are people who want to keep this work alive or reshape it, your supporters? And personally, I see three strategic shifts that matter right now. One, I suggest and implore you to let your data guide you. We may need to return back to the foundational arguments of DEI. And what I'm talking about is the need to make the business case again and really prove that DEI works and that it's important and that it's good for business, it's good for society, it's good for productivity, and it's good for retaining top talent. So let that be your anchor if necessary. Two, the kinds of skills I'm talking about, training for relational competence, really focusing on supporting people to be able to be in relationship with each other across identities, ideologies, and experiencing and to hold that tension. And that's the work that I'm doing right now. And then I'd say, of course, we need to double down on equity. Even as the language of DEI is being questioned, the legal and human rights infrastructure that supports DEI remains intact. Employment, law, accessibility laws, anti-discrimination policies, these are still active, they're enforceable, and they're necessary. And so when the ideological backlash confuses or destabilizes us, we return to these frameworks. They're not optional, they're foundational. Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you this evening. My job tonight is to take us through the corporate view of DEI. Unfortunately, we are in a position where DEI is a shallow reaction to real and consequential changes in demand. Most of those changes aren't really changes. The demands have always been there, but societal shifts have simply exposed them. The problem is, exposing demand is not enough. Brands must act to design experiences for this demand and be rewarded for doing so. Rewarded by their customers, rewarded by their employees, and ultimately rewarded by shareholders who decide this is the right way to go. The push for DEI stems from real pressing needs. Large parts of the market seeking specific utility. Easy to understand information, retail built for women, the key shoppers in most households, the unique needs of new Canadians trying to figure out why does milk come in a bag? Never mind how do I open or pour this damn thing. How does socio-political demand translate into user demand in the context of each brand's experiences? Well, frankly, DEI has never answered that question. Better customer experiences lead to higher net revenue. Diversity of an employee base is needed not just for equality, but because it takes 4,000 ideas to find 2 ideas that work. Getting the 4,000 ideas is far easier with divergent perspectives. Research has already proven this. Diverse teams drive innovation, and innovative companies outperform peers. So if all this is true, why are we still struggling to get this off the ground after 30 years of activity? Well, unfortunately, GDI is taking the position that this is a relatively easy solve. The performative actions, like days for this and luncheon for that, will do the job. The reality is, this is not a one-size-fits-all solution that every company can apply and copy paste. The state effort, it's data, it's research. Unlike performative DEI efforts, genuine reaction to demand requires talking to actual users, rethinking systems, funding profitable innovation machines, and delivering better experiences. The good news is this is all possible to do with the people that DEI targets in general. companies improving this works. The biggest companies in the world have built products and experiences around diverse audiences. It works. That's not really up for debate. What is up for debate is switching from a proposal-based activity to demand-driven design not only tap into larger markets, but also drive experience innovations that benefit all users. Consider Siri or Alexa, initially designed for users with disabilities, have benefit drivers, travelers, those with their hands otherwise occupied, and more. This is proof of taking demand from a traditional EDI group and applying it to a broader market. This works, it generates revenue, and it's repeatable. It's time to move on from hollow gestures and embrace new kinds of demand as a strategic imperative. By designing from disability and other groups, we can design systems that delight everybody. What if, instead of viewing inclusion as compliance or moral issue, we saw it as an opportunity for innovation and growth? Thank you.
Okay, I am going to be honest. I have hated the word diversity and by its extension DEI for a very long time. And I actually think, I think it's been dead for a long time, even way before this moment. Nearly a decade ago, Angela Davis said something that has not left me. In 2015, she said, "I have a hard time accepting diversity as a synonym for justice. Diversity is a corporate strategy. It's a strategy designed to ensure that the institution functions in the same way that it functioned before, except now you have some black faces and brown faces. It's a difference that doesn't make a difference." I can't help but agree with Professor Davis. And nothing has punctured the myth of and failure of DEI and diversity to me than Palestine, and not just in this moment. For 10 years, I was a CBC journalist and producer. And in my decade-long career at the CBC, the only interview of mine that was pulled out of thousands of daily news reports was an interview with a Palestinian journalist who described being attacked by Israeli forces during a reporting assignment in Jerusalem. This is in 2017. Not only did the interview not air, no senior leadership would have a conversation with me about why. There was no editorial conversation. No chance to talk this knee-jerk decision through. Listen, anyone who's worked in news will tell you editorial disagreements and conversations happen often. Sometimes they're tense. I know this because I'd had other editorial disagreements about anti-Black racism, about anti-Indigenous racism. And I didn't have any kind of conversation about what happened in the case of the Palestinian interview. It's worth noting, however, that the closest thing I got to answers as to why this interview did not run was through the fact-checking process when I wrote about this incident for my National Magazine award-winning essay for the Walrus, "Objectivity is a Privilege Afforded to White Journalists." Most damningly, when I quit my CBC job later, 2 years after this incident, sensing I'd hit some kind of wall where I just could not progress beyond the title of acting senior roles, I found out after my departure from somebody on the hiring committee that this interview with the Palestinian journalist had marked me as biased in the eyes of senior leadership, who then blocked me from getting the senior role I applied for. It was a devastating but super clarifying moment. All the work that I'd done over my years at the CBC, which came with awards and accolades, and which I'm very proud of, by the way, could be completely delegitimized due to one interview with a Palestinian, an interview about press freedom, no less, that didn't even go to air. This was the starkest example of what's known as the Palestine exception to me. Now, that was 2017 at the CBC. Just days ago, a student at an Ottawa high school was told to stay home from school after delivering her graduation speech as valedictorian of her class, in which she mentioned the 17,000 children killed in the genocide in Gaza. The principal called her and told her her comments had, quote, caused harm, even though they didn't even violate the school board's own policies. It's worth noting, but shouldn't really matter, that neither I nor this graduating Ottawa High School valedictorian, her name is Elizabeth Yao, are Palestinian. Yet, we are still not immune from the long arm of anti-Palestinian racism. This is the unique and insidious way that anti-Palestinian racism, or APR, can undo protections we have on our employment, our schools, our speech, our press freedom, our civil liberties, if you look to the US, even our immigration status, and not just for Palestinians, who have long known this, but for all of us in society. DEI, till this very moment, has largely failed to address, let alone name, anti-Palestinian racism. I think the time is long past to correct this wrong. I know many people are here because they care about equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm sure the last time I looked at the number of people in the room, it was over 200. I'm sure there is a lot of influence in this room. And I'm asking you all who are listening to be courageous, though it really shouldn't take courage to do this. My challenge to you is this. In this moment and moving forward, will you do your part to name, challenge, call out anti-Palestinian racism? This, to me, may be one of the biggest challenges of DEI today. Do you remember when it was controversial to say Black Lives Matter? Do you remember the time when women were seen as too emotional to report on stories about their own gender, like, say, the Montreal Massacre? Do you remember a time when LGBT people were afraid to be out at work? This is the reality today for many Palestinian and other Arab communities, many of whom feel and know that in order to make it, they have to hide or minimize their identities, while they simultaneously mourn and grieve for their families in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Iran. We owe them our support. Diversity that does not include and protect the livelihoods, dignity, and experiences of all people, and that's including Palestinian people, Black people, Indigenous people, disabled people, and their allies, is no diversity at all. Thank you.
As we consider the question of equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, I want to leave you with a simple and profound question. Canada, who do we want to be? Regardless of what's happening south of the border or around the world, I believe we're in a transformative moment. This is the time to shed the view of Canada as copycats. It's a time to rise to our own ideals, to close the gap between who we say we are and the unequal social and economic outcomes too many Canadians still face. For example, women in Canada are just over half of the working population from public reporting companies, but still earn 89 cents to every dollar earned by men, even though Canadian women are among the most educated in the world. And of course, when you look at this in a disaggregated way by racialized women, newcomers to Canada, immigrants, etc., that gap gets even wider, and that group makes collectively, on average, about 60% less than men. We also know that, also from publicly reported companies, people with disabilities and Indigenous workers hold just between 0.5 and 0.7% of board and senior roles, but make up 9% and 4% of the working population, respectively. Indigenous and Black Canadians represent 5% and 4.3% of the general population, but make up 32% and 9.2% of the incarcerated populations. These are not opinions, they are facts. These aren't just statistics, these are people. These are our neighbors, our coworkers, our classmates, and even if not our friends, our fellow Canadians. The business case for equity, diversity, and inclusion has always been here and always been clear. The question facing us today in Canada is one of the moral courage to keep going. But here's what makes this moment powerful. We already have a blueprint. Our Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees equality before the law without discrimination. The Canadian Human Rights Act mirrors this aspiration. Both allow for efforts to improve the outcomes of disadvantaged groups through programs and activities that remove bias and barriers to access and opportunity. As the Employment Equity Act Review Task Force, led by Dr. Adele Blackett, reminded us, Canada, more than a century ago, signed on to the International Labour Organization's constitution, committing us to lasting peace built on social justice for workers and reaffirming that commitment in 1944 in the annex to that constitution, that all human beings, regardless of race, creed, or sex, etc., have the right to pursue their material and spiritual well-being in dignity, security, and equal opportunity. The Canadian Race Relations Foundation, who partnered in this effort today, said this in their presentation to that task force in 2022. There is an opportunity to make employment equity transformative as it helps Canada as a whole see itself. So again, I ask, who do we want to be? To those who oppose EDI efforts, rejecting equity work without offering meaningful options, solutions is not neutral. It is asking us to ignore these systemic inequities that threaten the very fabric of our democracy. To those committed to EDI and justice, we must be self-reflective. The work must be deeply transformative, not performative. We need to build inclusive systems through meaningful consultation, barrier removal, and real accountability, what the Employment Equity Review Task Force calls substantive equality, a framework which I strive for in all my work, moving to what would be transformative in that context. I speak as someone who lives this complexity. I am a proud Black woman of African descent, a first-generation immigrant and refugee. My family has deep roots to Canada. When providence and opportunity collided to bring my parents here and around the world to work and study in the 60s and 70s, and before that, a historical connection to the Black loyalists whose search for freedom was part of the founding of Freetown, Sierra Leone, where some of my family is from. So it is that I was born in Germany, raised in Sierra Leone, displaced by a war there that was entrenched in global post-colonial trade imbalances and blood diamonds, among other challenges, and eventually came to Canada only to be marked again as other. Today, I watch my Canadian-born children still being asked where they are really from, or I contend with supporting them after they are being called the N-word in our schools, or being told that no one wants to play with them because they are Black. But we, my family, Indigenous peoples, racialized Canadians, people of all genders, abilities, religions, backgrounds, persuasions, cannot be erased. We are part of the Canadian story. We are living in a moment of deep polarization, but it's time to double down, to listen more deeply, to design institutions that make room for all, and through our public institutions, including universities that face singular challenges right now, in this moment, we must protect our role in educating, questioning, and imagining a more just Canada. Because in the end, it's not enough to say we believe in freedom, dignity, and belonging for some, not all Canadians. This is about the unfinished work and promise of Canada. So again, I ask, Canada, who do we want to be? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Komal, Bhasin, Rich Donovan, Pacinthe Mattar, and just now, Dr. Yabome Gilpin-Jackson. All right, chat is already lit up. We're excited to open this up and get into it. To our audience at home, let us know where you're joining us from today. Let's see. Yep, then we have a little poll that's popped up here. Okay, we have audience members registered from all over, including Regina, hello and welcome, Burlington, Burnaby, Port Perry, Sudbury. What's up to Bowmanville, Winnipeg, Scarborough, Halifax, and Calgary. Also, we have a number of folks joining from south of the border as well. Hello to those registered from Colorado, California, New Jersey, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. That's great to see. A reminder, if you have a question as we move into the Q&A portion, please submit it via Zoom chat. I'm now going to welcome back our talkers for our Q&A session. Just turn your cameras back on and we'll get into it. Excellent. Nice to see you again. Something that came up in tonight's talks and comes up a lot in this work is the word performative. And I think as we take a look at the history of DEI, the backlash of DEI, the country we want to be, I'd be curious to hear from this group, what is performative versus like what is really doing the work? Komal, perhaps start with you, especially because you highlighted you're getting into like the nuance, you're getting in, to the stuff. I think often if you're doing the work right, it is hard.
Absolutely. I would say, you know, you can think of even performative as a bit of a spectrum, right? There's and what I'll say is that to do equity, diversity, inclusion work in a truly heart-centered way, in a way that's really reflective of our values, we should always be assessing for if our actions are performative, always. And there will always be an element of critique that we can invite to level up. So there's a spectrum of performative, and I think the type of performative that folks are talking about that this backlash invites a bit of an opening to correct is the one and doneness, the train once and everyone's got it, the tick the box, we did it, the brought in a consultant who did a 10-page kind of DEI work plan that sat on a shelf that was unimplementable. We understand what an organization needs to do, but at an individual level, people still don't know how to relate to each other. If a tough moment comes up where there's a rupture, no one has the competency to walk through. Any of the efforts that precede those moments would be considered performative because you ticked boxes, you got to say you did it, and then it didn't actually work. And so this work always is moving in a cyclical way, and it always can deepen and improve. And there was an interesting question that was brought up around, are there any good examples of like the values, the underpinnings of work that we can really be proud of? And I would say they managed to get through difficult moments and sustain the work anyway. The work that's not performative takes time, it's sustained, and there have been difficult moments. People have made it through, organizations have made it through, and the work continues.
Rich, you mentioned this in your talk, beyond the lunch and learn, it's not one size fits all. I really liked the line, it takes 4,000 ideas to find two that work. So what is the resistance to that, Rich? Like, why do you think there's still this desire for the one size fits all? Is it that checklist that people just want to be quickly done with it?
It's the opposite of that, right? So organizations, whether they're for-profit or governments, are very complex, right? They're driven by one thing usually, and for the for-profit company, that's profitability. So the good news behind EDI, whatever you want to call it, it's a large marketplace with lots of complexity, lots of interesting demands, lots of interesting ways to differentiate yourself. However, the space has never taken the time to understand what those things are relative to a specific company. So that takes investment, that takes time, that takes effort. And what we find is when companies embed this in what they do already and don't try to bolt this on as a artificial program or a one-done effort, this is when it becomes successful. So companies like Apple, companies like Google, companies like Amazon, they leverage this ability to make their products not only easier to use for people with disabilities, but easier to use for everybody.
Mm.
And you can scale that up to whatever diversity vertical you want to scale it to. The one I chuckle at is women, 52% of the population, largest household shoppers. Yet if you go talk to most retail design teams, they're all men. You go talk to most retail um, agencies that do research and advertising, they're all men. So how the hell do we think we're going to design experiences for women if all of this is coming from men? Right? So we need to kind of take a step back and say, what are we doing here?
Mhm.
Are we basing this in data? Are we basing this in demand? Or are we basing this in a socio-political desire for a perfect world?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Bhasin, you brought up the article you wrote for the Walrus. And for those who aren't familiar, this dates back to August 2020. As you mentioned, it was about quote unquote objectivity in journalism and who is seen as objective. It has since been added to curriculum in universities across the country and around the world. I'm curious, almost 5 years later, what impact do you still hope that has? As well, what have you heard from students and professors who are using that article?
Um, I couldn't have imagined the impact that it would have. And in fact, I remember on publication day, which I'll never forget, August 21st at 10 a.m. was when it was published. And I watched and just waited for my journalism career to crumble. But something else happened, which is that this notion of objectivity, I mean, I wrote about it in journalism, but what I heard was I heard from people in medicine, in law, in academia, in urban planning saying everything that you're writing about, this notion of objectivity, is so relevant to our work. I think it's been the greatest honor of writing the article is seeing how far it's traveled in educational spaces. And I know there is a professor watching here today, Professor Sherry Okeke from TMU, who up until this year was inviting me into her classroom to speak about its subjects. I'm also very sorry to the students who've had to read the article 5 times every single year in journalism school. But its longevity 5 years later, it speaks to the fact that, we spoke earlier about when is diversity performative and when is it real. And I would say that diversity or DEI that does not actively challenge power or change the status quo is performative. It's decorative. It's playing around with the edges instead of challenging deeply ingrained power dynamics. And the fact that the article continues to resonate, that students write to me and say, this article I was considering not pursuing journalism, but this article makes me realize that I can speak truth to power. It is so encouraging. And I actually think student journalists are paving a very brave and morally courageous way. And I'm so glad that they're still reading the work all this time later.
I'm glad to hear that. Uh, Yabome, I have a question for you, then I'm going to get to the audience questions. I know that some organizations are renaming the work of DEI or EDI, but still committing to it. And curious what you think about this approach, if it's tactical for employees, leaders in the US, or if we'll see that trend. How important is what we call this work, especially when certain words and even these terms are under attack?
hmm that's a great question. I Language matters and always has mattered, and I've been saying that before this moment in terms of what we call this work in general. I've been a proponent long before things like the B were added to EDIB, etc. That what's the end here? And if you look at the acronym from the beginning, I was also that voice for it. I don't think this way that this work has been marketed as EDI is going to serve us well in the long run, because this is not about tactics. It's about transformative change. That said, I do not believe this is the moment necessarily to change language, but context matters. I think for those that it makes some strategic sense, okay, have at it. I think personally for me, this is not a time in which I roll back talking about equity-centered futures, which I have always talked about, and that fundamentally we need to create institutions, spaces, whatever what have you, where we're making sure everybody has that sense of belonging, which is a fundamental human need. And I know even that has become overused and people don't even know what belonging means anymore. I mean that in the true instinctive sense of walking into a space and going, do I belong here or not? And remembering that belonging is also a personal choice. It is also my choice to choose not to belong in a space. And that's the sort of two-sidedness of belonging that's often left out of this conversation. You can set the conditions for belonging as well, but I can also choose, these are not my people, this is not my tribe, this is not my space. Where do I want to be? And where do I want to spend my energies making change? All to say, language matters, but so does context. For those that it may make sense, consider it. But I think there are many contexts in which staying the course right now, especially on equity, which is the only outcome in the EDI acronym, diversity and inclusive strategies are strategies. They're tactics to the end of what? In some contexts, it's to the end of justice. In other contexts, it's to the end of equity. In other contexts, it's about creating belonging and inclusive excellence. But those are different from how we've been thinking about the EDI acronym. So just to complicate what you asked, complexify what you asked me a bit more, that's my answer.
I appreciate that. Okay, Susan from Saskatoon, or Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis, has a question for you, Komal. Can you identify what characterizes the few deeply embedded and successful EDI initiatives in Canada to which you referred? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say that uh, you know, first things first, they're led by people with lived experience. I'm just going to say the provocative thing. Those of us that have lived experience of being on the margins, being othered, being less represented, being having those experiences of identity-based adversity, we lead the work really well. And the best examples of equity work, in my view, are in work where the work has been led by people who have experience of being othered. Also, the best examples are ones where there's at the heart of the work is a theory of impact that centers co-creation. I think a lot of what we're talking about and the critiques of DEI are that a lot of the work has been like done for us, or the policies are set for us, or they're decided at boardroom tables, or they're decentered from individuals for whom they make an impact. I would say that anything that happens in equity, diversity, inclusion needs to include a lens around co-creation with the users, with the end users, with students, with employees, with the customers Rich was referencing. It just, these models that are patronizing across structures in society, not just EDI, are causing division, are causing polarization. We need to learn to do more with each other.
I just add to that. I think it's the critical point. So part of our business model as a business is to go directly to people with disabilities to put them through the experiences that our clients feel every day. And what we discovered is there's a term for it that we created. We've called it the fallacy of the expert, where companies will bring in an expert to tell them what they should do. And the expert may be an expert in going to a good school and building a set of skills that he or she can sell something with, but they don't actually know what customers go through on a day-to-day basis. Right? So we developed panels of thousands of people with disabilities, and we actually recruit them to secret shop our clients. And the data that we get back is granular, it's context based, and is usable by clients to improve the experience. And I think one of the problems with the DEI EDI is it tends to come at things from 70,000 feet. And what you really have to do is get 2 feet above the ground and figure out what the hell is going on down there and fix that. Right? And I don't think DEI does a good job of that.
Thank you for that. Cheryl shares, we have used the business case, and Rich, you spoke to that in your talk, and the justice-based case, Pacinthe, that's where you come in to support this work. Neither are without challenges. What is the new thinking on approaches? So, Yabome, I'd like to start with you, then come to Pacinthe on that.
I think the new thinking in a lot of ways is old thinking, so to speak, that we just haven't done well. So this idea of deeply transformative ways of doing this work, I think people keep looking for sort of simpler answers, and I think this has been talked to a little bit already. To find a way to do it and it's done, but this work is never done. That's part of the challenge. I think that where we need to go is some of what we just heard in terms of engaging real real engagement around the challenges, figuring out solutions. Every context is different, but the fundamentals are the same in terms of if we really want to transform the way that we think, act, and interact with each other in this context. What does that look like? Not in terms of surface, feel good, performative, responses, but having the real conversations of what does this look like, and making sure that we're making both structural changes and going to the root, whatever the root is, of where the issues are, as well as doing sort of the surface cultural things. I think one of the challenges that happened in sort of EDI spaces is to start with education and raising consciousness, but not having anywhere for people to go once that work has started or is done. And so you have people all around feeling either terribly exposed or feeling guilt and shame on all the things that come with this work, with nowhere to go in terms of structures and ways for them to take action, or to feel like it's okay to just sit with what they've just learned and figure out what that means for themselves. And so I think fundamentally what we need to do is to continue to do this work in deeper, more complex ways, and in transformative ways, and to not do one-off interventions. If we look at the arc of time, this work takes time. And I think sometimes it is actually the folks doing equity work that push too quickly. And then we sort of recreate the very loop that we're trying to get out of, because we're trying to show that we're doing something. And that for me is what's performative and what I am not prone to do. I'd rather take the criticism, unfortunately, especially as someone that has had a lot of bridger roles in institutions. I'd rather take the criticism and explain myself than try to do things too quickly that are surface and that don't get to the root of what's needed.
Pacinthe.
Yeah, I'll be honest. The question about approach, like, do we need a different approach? There's justice and there's business. And I'm glad you raised the business case, because one thing I remember literally the first time I heard about the case for diversity at the time, DEI, was in journalism school. And someone said diversity is good for journalism because it's good for business. And I just remember being like, wait, well, what happens when it stops being good for business? And we're seeing this in real terms. I mean, in the US, there's companies like Target who have rolled back their EDI initiatives, and they're facing boycotting. And so this idea of linking your EDI work to just business is, I think it's worrisome to me, because the right thing to do will always be the right thing to do, no matter if the profits follow or not. And as Dr. Yabome said, the arc of time is long, and the moral arc of justice is long. And so I'm not sure. I'm actually struggling in real time. What better approach is there to this work than one that is rooted in justice? Is that not what we're after? in our workplaces. I mean, in journalism, there's a whole movement called solutions journalism. It's kind of breaking away from the kind of mainstream idea that journalism is just here's what happened. But how can journalism improve lived outcomes for especially marginalized people? There's wonderful examples of this journalism happening in Baltimore, for example, with the Baltimore Beat. So the justice centered approach to EDI, to diversity, to all of this is the strongest one, and I think will withstand the test of time. I'm saying this as someone, I have very deliberately stayed out of mainstream institutions since I left my mainstream job at the CBC. And is because I feel like within institutions is when you get the most limitations to, actual justice focused work. So I've kind of been on the periphery and I'm saying all this, oh, believe in justice and follow justice. But I'm not someone who has to get people paid at the end of the month. I'm not paying overhead for a business. I'm not, responsible for payroll for people and their families. So I say this knowing that I am speaking from a place of, working solo. So at the end of the day, I just, the question about approach, it has always been justice to me. And sometimes justice will come up against profits. And I think we're seeing that in droves. And I think the question that I want people to ask themselves is, what do you want the legacy to be? Is it that you balanced your budget, or that in the work that we're doing, which I think is all centered around improving people's lives, what do you want to look back on?
I'm going to get to one more audience question before we have to wrap up. Yabon, you want to jump in
Just
quickly?
just a quick add, thank you, Percent, for that. And I would just add a shout out to the companies, especially the publicly traded ones that are staying the course, the ones that have voted down shareholder proposals to cancel EDI initiatives. There's a whole list of them. There's a whole tracking of them online. Just to also balance and shout out that that is also happening, as in real time. There's the retrenchment, but in real time, like you said, what will withstand the test of time? The right thing will always be the right thing to do. Percent, thank you for that. I just wanted to plus one on, and to say there are also the big corporations out there standing and continuing.
Thank you. If I can make an observation here, there's an assumption in this conversation that everybody's on the same page. And the reality is the four of us are falling in the minority of understanding what this is. So there has to be bridges built to people who do have to enter to California Teachers Pension Plan, who do have to enter to Texas Teachers Pension Plan. And I'll be frank with you guys, I don't see those bridges being built. And I think it's one of the reasons why DEI in the US has gotten valid pushback, is because there's been a failure to connect these demands, which are valuable, to the people that should care. And it just dawned on me listening to you speak as if this was a good thing that we all think it is. Not everybody's convinced of that.
Rich, you're bringing the real talk. Thank you for that. And I think we have time for one final question. Komal, I'm going to direct this at you because it speaks to something you brought up in your talk. Alejandro asks, as EDI leading practitioners, how can we integrate dissent? And Rich, this is, what you were just speaking to as well. Alejandro writes, often I find unless training is mandatory, only receive participants already convinced in the general idea of EDI. How do we proactively integrate voices of dissent, of resistance in a way that is constructive?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, and it's exactly at the heart of how I've shifted how I'm working. And I think it sort of speaks to this idea that there is more and more disagreement, polarization, lack of trust, lack of safety happening in complex workplaces where I've heard in the US after the most recent election, people went back to work and they weren't sure, like, did you vote for racism? Can I trust the person in the cubicle next to me? So that's like, it's pretty intense down south, but I still think similar things are happening up here. And what I would say is that for those of you that are practitioners in this work, to the extent that you are able, to expand out your offerings to include conversations around how to sit and dissent with each other, how to disagree, how to repair conversations. Like I'm a psychotherapist, so I learned this stuff in school as it relates to couples therapy and parents and kids, and I'm applying it in workplaces. But it's that same thing around the difference between our very firm positions, the positions that we hold versus, for example, the interests that we share because we work together and because I want to have a pleasant go at work today, and so do you. So how do we hold discomfort? And some of this distills down into what I call like trauma-informed workplaces, like simply how to sit with discomfort without becoming dysregulated. And this is important work around, I think of Audre Lorde and self-care as an act of, like as an act of activism to take care of yourself, to the extent that we can sit with the discomfort of the discord that we see, the polarization we see, and stay regulated and stay in relationship. That is what will define how much I believe many workplaces will be willing to lean into DEI work going forward, because they will see that it brings benefits. We just have to shape it, I believe, and really level up the level of complexity we're willing to deal with.
I think that's something we can all take away from this conversation tonight, to create those spaces where we can disagree better. Thank you so much to all of our talkers. As they turn their cameras off, I'm going to tell our audience a little bit more about what we have coming up at the Walrus. Thank you again to our talkers tonight, Dr. Komal, Bhasin, Rich Donovan, Pacinthe, Mattar, and Dr. Yabome, Gilpin-Jackson. If you enjoyed today's virtual event, we have more coming up in the fall. The best way to stay in touch with the Walrus, keep an eye on your inbox. You're going to receive an email follow-up. And the best way to ensure you don't miss an event is opt into the Walrus newsletter. It's free, and we'll let you know about the events we have coming up, as well as share articles, podcasts, and more. We have recorded this video. I know some of you are wondering how you can best share this, we will post it. You can check in with us at thewalrus.ca/events to watch videos like this one or any of our talks in the Walrus Talks video room on our website. The Walrus is a unique animal in the media landscape because we are a registered charity. That means we are powered by people like you. So if you believe this moment we're in calls for deep, rigorous, clear-eyed reporting, please consider making a donation today. You can donate to the Walrus at our website, thewalrus.ca/support, to ensure that we can continue this work, including events and conversations like this one. Thanks again to our partner, Canadian Race Relations Foundation, for their generous support. I'd also like to thank our annual sponsors, Air Canada, Bullfrog Power, Inspire, RBC, and Rogers. And thank you all for tuning in. Have a great evening.